Fifth Doctor and his TARDIS team are back for yet another Doctor Who Big Finish main range adventure, the second of which to feature the android companion, who is of course Chameleon, that did appear in the later half of the Fifth Doctor era throughout the 1980s. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the February release from the Doctor Who Big Finish main range. There is in fact a rather unusual formatted story. There is in fact two 1-hour episodes. The first one is called Black Thursday and the second of which is called Power Game. The first episode being Black Thursday is written by Jamie Anderson, and the second episode being Power Game is written by Eddie Robson. Now both of which do of course feature the Fifth Doctor, Turlough, Tegan and the android Chameleon, and they are completely separate plots that have absolutely no link whatsoever. The really interesting thing about both of these stories is that they are around 1 hour long, meaning that essentially the new series currently, with the current format that they are using, could actually recreate a story very similar to this one for actual TV. It's a rather quick-paced story and the script is a lot different to a usual Big Finish main range episode. Now I must admit it is in fact a rather nice change. So firstly, and as always, in the description below I will leave the link to go and buy its release from the Big Finish website. It is currently out now. The physical CD is $14.99 and the download is $12.99. Both of these episodes have been directed by Ken Bentley, who has also directed Devil in the Mist, as well as next month's release as a part of the 2019 Fifth Doctor range. The whole episode itself has been produced by Scott Handcock, the script editor is Alan Barnes, and as per usual the executive producers are Nicholas Briggs and Jason Haig-Ellery. If you are interested by what I say throughout this review, you can also check out the casting information, story details, as well as the trailer and a closer look at the cover art on the Big Finish website, all of which will be linked in the description below. Now, as I was saying earlier, this episode is in fact two stories, and the first one is Black Thursday, as written by Jamie Anderson, and is in fact technically, I was going to say pure historical, because it sort of is, but it sort of isn't at the same time. It's one of those episodes that fits under a rather unusual limbo area, and I will discuss why a little bit later on when it comes to the actual narrative. The second episode is one of which that I was incredibly intrigued by in the last review, because we have essentially a TV programme that goes against the normal transmissions that you will get on a normal English TV, and it's basically a programme that exists on another network and people don't quite know how or why it is being broadcast. It's certainly, going into this release, it was the episode that I was most anticipating. However, I came out of the opposite side being incredibly pleasantly surprised, because Black Thursday was in fact the episode that completely sold this set for me, because we have an episode that is, as I say, a historical setting story and has emotion and depth behind it that I must admit is rather bleak, but it is a really good character piece. So firstly, discussing the Doctor and his companions, we have Peter Davison as the Fifth Doctor, and I kind of feel like the early half of 2019 has so far been a do the Fifth Doctor a little bit of justice, because I've recently been watching season 19 as a part of my product reviews and taking a look at all 7 of those stories, and then of course last month we had Devil in the Mist, and now we have this 2-part story as well. And I kind of feel like I am actually getting a little bit more respect for the Fifth Doctor. Previously, he was a Doctor that I must admit did bore me a little bit. His costume's a little bit dull and his personality didn't particularly stand out too much. However, what I've seen in this story, as well as my recent viewing of season 19, is that his Doctor is incredibly different, is very vulnerable, but also at the same time he has that power and authority when he really needs it. However, he doesn't utilise that when it is unnecessary, and that is something that is seen throughout these two stories, and I think that especially in Black Thursday it shows that he has a lot of understanding of human instinct, but also at the same time he has a lot of care for his TARDIS team, regardless of the mistakes that they've done in the past. And then we have Turla, who is of course played by Mark Strickson, and once again a very similar case to the Fifth Doctor, where not many of his TV stories actually stand out to me. However, in the previous story of Devil in the Mist, I was rather impressed by his character, and then in this story, once again, especially in Black Thursday, I'm seeing a much more heroic side to Turla that is rather sarcastic and funny at the same time. He was certainly my favourite character from the TARDIS team. He kind of became a hero, certainly very influential at the very final act of the first episode, which I did really enjoy. And it is in fact, in my opinion, probably one of Mark Strickson's best contributions to Big Finish so far. In the behind the scenes, he did in fact reveal that he really enjoyed acting throughout this story, which who knows, maybe that contributed to the way that he actually played the role. And then we have Janet Fielding, who does a cosplay Tegan Javanka, and once again, I've been watching her in season 19 recently. In this CD release, we in fact see a version of her character once again that is rather likeable. I didn't really have any flaws with her throughout the two stories. She in fact had a much more prominent role throughout the second episode, being Power Game, where she's in fact a part of a game show, which is rather intriguing, and she didn't really have too much to do in the first story, being Black Thursday. However, there was a really nice moment where she was actually responding to sexist remarks, where somebody claimed that she couldn't be a nurse because she's female, because this episode does of course take place in the time period of 1902, so yeah, there was still a little bit of a difference in opinions in that time period in kind of what females can and can't do, so that was very nice to see her in this episode. And then of course after that we do of course have Jon Culshaw, who does play Chameleon, which for those of you that have seen my review of Devil in the Mist, you'll of course know that I really loved Chameleon throughout that story. And this episode, I found Chameleon once again very funny, very different. It is nice to see him utilising the chameleon aspect of his character. We see him disguising himself as a Welsh villager, which was rather funny, seeing Jon Culshaw actually do a Welsh accent. He did in fact do it very well. And once again, Chameleon is a character that couldn't be utilised pretty much at all throughout the TV show. Big Finish is a perfect way to use that character, and they certainly use that throughout these two stories, because both of them have involvement of Chameleon as a character, and in particular episode 1 sees a very different version of Chameleon, but also one of which that you kind of can't help but sympathise with. So now moving on to the actual narrative of Black Thursday. As I was saying earlier, this episode is kind of a pure historical, but kind of isn't at the same time. The location of this episode is a very small Welsh village, and basically it is all about a mining corporation type place where they are mining coal and other minerals, and basically there is a disaster where gas starts to leak, a lot of people end up being killed, there is an explosion, and it is basically a horrific circumstance that the Doctor and his companions actually arrive in, and it is really lovely to essentially see the TARDIS team become almost an ambulance there to help the casualties and to get them out of the mine, and the Doctor takes responsibility to try and get everybody out alive. And there is a number of deaths in this episode, and for the most part the majority of the narrative is basically mourning those deaths, and Chameleon, being Chameleon in this story, he has another way of interpreting the deaths because he is a very unusual character, and basically he plays a Welsh villager who is also in the mine, actually being a miner. As he's almost disguised in that character, he actually witnesses one of the characters dying, and he later sees the mother of that character, because the person who dies is almost a young teenage child, and basically Chameleon sees this woman mourning so very much about the loss of her son as well as her husband, so he takes it upon himself to basically morph into both of them at the same time. He is then kind of put into the image of being a sort of illusion created by the devil, and he is an evil creature, and Chameleon doesn't really understand what he has done wrong, and what he understands is the husband has this whole idea, in simple terms, everybody deserves to be treated how they treat other people, and Chameleon uses that, and he basically goes out to try and kill the main leader of the mining corporation because of his negligence down to the disaster that takes place. He wants to have revenge on what he has done, and naturally, Chameleon being Chameleon, his logical idea is to kidnap his very own daughter and try and kill her by dangling her off a very tall building. And at the very end of the story, we have the natural thing that happens in Chameleon stories, where he basically needs to apologise for his actions, and you feel very sorry for him because it's not his fault. That is the way that he is programmed. He's almost a bit like Adric, because he does things all the time that is incredibly wrong and very just unhelpful. yet you kind of feel sorry for him because of the way that he is, but I feel more sorry for Chameleon than Adric, because at least Chameleon is sort of likeable, if not very likeable, because of the way that he is and the innocence that he has. There's no denying, if you are looking for a Big Finish story that is incredibly upbeat, this episode certainly isn't one of those. I must admit, I actually felt rather, not necessarily depressed, but a little bit ugh at the end of this story, because the plot is very hard-hitting. You have that whole idea of coping with the deaths of two people from your family, and the way that that is responded to, and then the whole idea of them essentially coming back from the dead. And it is a rough, grim story, and the Doctor and the companions go through a very rough and grim scenario, because you have these people from the Welsh village that are trying to frame the Doctor and his friends, and it's just all not very nice. And I think that Jamie Anderson has done an excellent job of actually portraying a historical that is very intelligent once again, but also at the same time educational of what actually went on in the mines in the early 1900s. It is a very dangerous job, and this story really well represents that, and considering that it is only 1 hour long, it is incredibly well paced. It gets a lot done within the actual story itself, and I would love to see the new series do a story in a very same manner to this one, because if they did, I think it will be a very popular episode, simply because it's powerful, it's emotional, it has that whole idea of bleakness in there, but also at the same time it creates a good adventure and puts the Doctor and his companions at threat. A really lovely way to end this story is we have the Doctor taking his companions, and more necessarily Chameleon, basically 84 years into the future, to the exact same mining village, and basically he wants to show Chameleon this monument that's been put in place, which is basically a tribute to all the people that died in the mine's destruction, essentially, and basically wants to show Chameleon that this is the way that humans actually cope with loss, and impersonating them in a weird morphing science fiction way isn't the way forward. And I really like that, because it kind of showed that the Doctor respected Chameleon for what he did in the episode, but also at the same time wanted to show him that that was wrong and this is the way to change as a character. It's basically the perfect learning curve for Chameleon as a weird shape-shifting robot. So now moving on to the second episode of this monthly range release. It is very unusual to have two episodes that are completely different in their style, but basically the main idea for this 1 hour story is we've just had a bleak, emotional story that is rather depressing but great at the same time, a really powerful episode. Now let's take it up a notch, let's do something more light-hearted and fun, and let's do something that is certainly a lot more new series in its approach, and it is the episode that I was most looking forward to, and it is Power Game, as written by Eddie Robson, which sees basically these alien transmissions that are being put over the channels of the BBC during certain transmissions, and they are taking humans out of society in order to complete these certain game show games, in order to get these crystals, which turns out to be something entirely different that is in fact helping an alien race basically create this all-powerful weapon that she can then sell on to other races, because once again she's a bad, horrible alien that needs to have a little bit of justice put into her life. And what I like about this story is that it is quite cringy, I must admit. It is very much of, once again, that 1980s, 1990s game show. It actually put me in a little bit of the mindset of the modern game shows such as The Chase and Tipping Point, where it is essentially the same thing on a loop every single day, yet people still, for some reason, God knows why, still actually enjoy it, because you see people going in from the public in different areas of society trying to compete in these games, and the whole idea is that these people who are watching on the other sides of the TV screens are then chosen to play these games in order to get the crystals. Chameleon has gone off on his little adventure. Previously in the last story he mentioned to the Doctor that he feels like a liability, therefore the Doctor is a little bit concerned because he has gone wandering around the city of York, which I'm quite local to, which is nice to see York actually in a story. It's quite a cool little reference, but basically Chameleon has gone on a little adventure, probably to the shops, and he's not came back, bless him. He's just wandered off, never to be seen again. And once again, it shows I found it really funny. I don't know why, but I just find the fact that Chameleon is once again so useless, but so helpful at the same time. He's a daft character, but basically Chameleon has gone into this game show, and Tegan has also gone into this game show to be a contestant, and it means that Janet Fielding needs to basically play this character that is, once again, obeying everything that she's actually told to do, which is a very rare thing for Tegan Javanka to do, because she's very stubborn. But it was a fun story, I must admit. My only flaw that I have is that the actual idea behind it is very basic. I feel like the alien in this episode could have had a lot more development. I kind of feel like the time could have been used a little bit more in order to reveal what the alien wanted to do with the weapons. Instead of maybe selling them on, I kind of wanted a more evil plot behind it, or maybe even something not to do with weapons, maybe about, I don't know, brainwashing the public in order to try and get them to be zombies or something and servants for their own race. I don't really know. Maybe taking people out of reality and taking them back to their homeworld in order to once again become slaves or servants to a different species. Instead we kind of got a mixture between Parting of the Ways and Live 34, because a lot of this episode is seen through that TV style. The whole episode actually starts like a TV transmission, and then it goes into the normal story that you come to expect Big Finish to do with the Doctor and Turla trying to find Tegan and Chameleon at the same time. As I say, it's kind of Parting of the Ways, but maybe a little bit less effective, and this episode doesn't really do or have the impact as to what Parting of the Ways had by using media and using kind of the different people within society, but I still kind of enjoyed it. I think the thing and the main message about this story, as well as Black Thursday, is that both of them can be achieved very easily within the new series. And if I'd seen this episode within the TV series, if this episode was with the 13th Doctor, Yaz, Ryan and Graham, maybe Yaz has gone into this game show and Graham's gone missing as well, and Ryan and the Doctor need to try and find Yaz and Graham because they are in this TV show, it could very easily be done. All you need to do is change around the characters, and instead of having the 5th Doctor TARDIS team, have the current TARDIS team. That plot will be very intriguing, very different, and pretty much nothing like new series Doctor Who has done in many, many years, so I would naturally respect it. And it kind of shows that even the standard Big Finish stories that aren't necessarily the strongest, they're just fun and don't really do too much, and they're okay but missable at the same time, they can still be stronger and more experimental than average new series Doctor Who stories. It's not the case that I'm being negative to new series Doctor Who, it's the case that sometimes even the most average Big Finish stories can in fact be better than new series episodes, and this is pretty much a perfect example of that. Eddie Robson does also rather brilliantly fit into the story. Basically 3 people who are the equivalents of TV fanatics. They enjoy science fiction and they basically have their own little club, and they all wanted to watch this specific show, and that just so happened to be one of the times where the transmission was blocked and this rather unusual TV show came through that the BBC had absolutely no knowledge of at the very time, and naturally they started to collect them up over a while. Maybe it is in fact the northern version of Linda. That would be quite cool, wouldn't it? But I did like the way that Eddie Robson actually involved those within the actual story, simply because it kind of gave the science fiction fan somebody to not necessarily relate to, but kind of at the same time see the episode almost from their eyes, and see kind of the whole idea of the transmissions almost as a Doctor Who story, and we are trying to track down what's going on with that episode. And you can kind of see the parallels between the people featured in this episode and a Doctor Who fan, so I think that is a very nice inclusion for this story, and I do really like the inclusion of the North as well. It is a very, very little thing, because you could very easily just say, this episode is set in Wales, this one's set in Surrey, this one's, I don't know, set in Newcastle. It's one of those things where you can very easily just do it, but it is nice to have an episode that is actually based in a northern city, with northern people, with northern accents, because we don't really get too much representation in Doctor Doctor Who. That is my review of Black Thursday and Power Game. Overall, for these two 1 hour stories, I actually came out of the other side thoroughly enjoying the two episodes, actually more so than I originally thought. And I loved the little twist, because originally I thought I would have liked Power Game more, because I think I even quoted in the previous review, it sounds right up my street, but it kind of shows sometimes even the most sort of average sounding Big Finish stories, like a normal setting historical story such as Black Thursday, can actually be a little bit more than it seems and develop a really powerful, emotional yet bleak story. And for that reason, I really do recommend these two episodes. I think that if you are a fan of new series Doctor Who and want to get into Big Finish, these episodes are only 1 hour long, so they are naturally very fast paced and keep the plot running constantly. And also, if you are wanting an episode for the Fifth Doctor that maybe gives him a little bit of justice but also sees him in different settings, this episode is also very much for you. But if you're one of which that is more of a fan of your standard monthly range stories that are 2 hours long, then I will probably avoid this one, simply because it is a lot more new series in style compared to the other standard monthly range releases. But these two episodes are in fact a very good example that the 1 hour running time can actually be very, very effective. Join me in my next Doctor Who Big Finish main range review, as I'm going to be taking a look at the final story from the 5th Doctor 2019 trilogy, and the final episode to feature Chameleon for this period round, and it is of course the Chameleon Empire, written by Jonathan Morris, and it is a rather intriguing story that was in fact referenced to at the end of Power Game, and is seeing Chameleon actually travel back to his home planet because he is needed. So I can't wait to see what happens in that story, because once again, it pretty much sounds like a completely Chameleon dedicated story, which is exactly what I want for Big Finish, because the TV show lacked to use him, therefore I want Big Finish to utilise him as much as possible, and I just hope that this is the beginning. I want much more Chameleon in the future. I want him to have his own spin-off with Frobisher. They can both be shapeshifters together. That would be brilliant. I will write it. Big Finish, hit me up. I will script it. All 70 episodes. Thanks for watching this review. I hope you have enjoyed it, and stay tuned for more Doctor Who content over the coming weeks. Thanks for watching. I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.